I moved as far away from the edge as I could get and dropped to the ground. There was a vague at number 2D emp to make it look like I was just number 2D-ing down casually to have a rest, but by now my fear of embarrassment was outweighed by my fear of falling to my death. Of course, number 2D-ing on the floor made me no safer. But it was not based on logic. My brain was sending out strong signals to the rest of my body to get down. I even found myself looking down at the slab of stone to avoid looking out at the view. Number 2D took a picture of me crouching on the floor and we now have a funny memory to look back on. But what was going on at the time? Why did I have the urge to get on the floor? My phobia, learned early in childhood, meant that the moment I saw those tickets and imagined climbing to the top of the tower, my body reacted. My heart started beating faster, my breathing became shallow and fast, my palms sweaty. The building being number 1F balance only contributed to my predictions that I would fall to my death at any moment. But the brain's alarm system, which was sounding and telling me to get to safety, is more like a smoke alarm. It doesn't have time to take account of all the facts. Its job is to sense danger and let me know. It takes its information from the distress signals in my body, information about my surroundings from my senses, and pieces it together with memories of what was happening when I last felt this way. It takes its information from the distress signals in my body, information about my surroundings from my senses, and pieces it together with memories of what was happening when I last felt this way. In the same way that a smoke alarm can go number 1F when there is a fire, it can also go number 1F when someone is making the toast. The strong urge to drop to the ground was a suggestion from my brain that my body took very seriously, much to the amusement of everyone else on the tower. The fear was overwhelming, so I did the first thing I could think of to feel safer. I wanted the fear to go away. Those strong urges to get to safety are not a fault, but the brain working at its best to keep us safe. Crucially, my actions did not make me any safer but just helped me to feel safer. The question of how to make anxiety go away might be one of the most common questions I receive. It makes sense to ask that. Anxiety is uncomfortable at best, overwhelming at worst. When you feel anxious, your body is working really hard, so it's also exhausting. Nobody wants to live with anxiety every day. Here's where I went wrong on the Leaning Tower of Pisa and did very number 2D to help my fear of heights. I avoided the fear as much as I could. I got close to the ground, I avoided looking out at the view. I even shut my eyes when I could. I tried to convince myself that I was not up high. I let number 2 see the tower before my fear had let number 2 seat me. As my feet hit the comforting grass of the Field of Dreams once again, I felt a rush of relief and my body immediately calmed. My brain said, phew. That was dangerous. Let's never do that again. I did everything I could to make the fear go away as soon as possible. But all the things that give us that instant relief tend to keep us stuck in the long term. If I knew then what I know now, and I was on that trip to tackle my fear of heights, here's what I would have done. I would have gone to the top of the tower and looked out at the view. The feelings would all have been the same, but this time I would allow it to be present without trying to avoid it. I would have responded to them by taking control of my breathing and I would have focused on breathing slowly. I would have reminded myself that my body and brain were responding in this way because I have memories of being up high and feeling unsafe as a child. I would have reminded myself repeatedly that I was, in fact, safe. I would turn my number 2D attention to why I was there and I would continue to breathe slowly for however long it took for my body to exhaust itself. When my fear started to subside and my body calmed, only then would I step down again. I would then repeat that number 2D earn for as many days as possible, knowing that over time my body would habituate to the situation and my fear response would gradually reduce in its intensity. Fear is a part of our survival response. It is supposed to be intensely uncomfortable, and the urges to escape and then avoid the feared situation are supposed to be strong. If we are in a survival situation, that system works incredibly well to keep us safe. That moment you are crossing the road and you hear a car horn too close, before you can even think about the situation, you dash to the curb quicker than you ever thought you could move. Then you feel the surge of adrenaline wash over your entire body. That is your fear response working at its best. But a system that works that fast does not have time to contemplate what signs are valid and which ones might be less reliable signs of danger. It senses, it acts. You survive. Thank you, brain. In other situations when your life is not in danger, the urges are still the same. You're asked to speak in a meeting and your heart starts pounding. Your heart may be number 2D, in your body ready to be alert and perform. But if you interpret that as fear and make your excuses to leave the room, then avoid those meetings in the future. You never get to experience talking in meetings and having it go well. The things that give us immediate relief from our fear tend to feed that fear in the long term. Every time we say no to something because of fear, we reconfirm our belief that it wasn't safe or that we couldn't handle it. Every time we cut something out of our lives because of fear, life shrinks number 2D. So our number 1F orts to get rid of fear today mean that fear gets to take over our life choices in the long term. Our number 2D emps to control fear and eliminate it become the real problem that dictates our every move. Fears around every turn, in every novel situation we face, in every creative endeavor and every learning experience. If we are unwilling to experience it, what are we number 2 seat with? Chapter summary. It is understandable to want anxiety to disappear. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. To fight fear you must first be willing to face it. Escape and avoidance only provides short-term relief but feeds anxiety in the long term. Our number 2D emps to control fear and eliminate it become the real problem that dictates our every move. A threat response needs to work fast, so it tends to sound the alarm before you have a chance to think things through in more detail. Chapter 23. Things we do that make anxiety worse. When we feel anxious about something, the most natural human response is to avoid it. We know that if we stay away, we'll feel safe, for now. But avoidance not only maintains anxiety, it makes it worse over time. Your brain learns like a scientist. Each time it has an experience, positive or negative, it clocks that as evidence for its beliefs. If you avoid the thing you fear, you never give yourself the chance to build up evidence in your mind that you can get through it and survive. Just telling your brain that something is safe is not enough. You must experience it. Your brain will take some convincing, so you need to repeat that behavior over and over. As many times as it takes. The things you do most of the time become your comfort zone. So, if you want to feel less anxious about something, do it as number 2 as you can. Use the skills to help you sit with the anxiety and it will reduce over time. When we learn to face the things that make us feel afraid, we get stronger. When we do that day at number 2 day, over time we develop a sense of growth. Imagine if, over the next 5 years, you made your decisions based on the life you want to have, instead of fear. We avoid the discomfort of fear in so many ways. If you feel anxious about a social event, you may avoid it by not going. Or maybe you do go, but you drink to excess before you go. Drinking may dampen that anxiety in the moment, leaving you feeling the need to do the same at the next social event. These safety behaviors work in the same way to numb the anxiety in the moment. But they don't help us to feel less afraid in the future. In fact, they do the opposite. They feed the anxiety for the future and we become dependent on using those safety behaviors, making life even harder. Here is a list of some common safety behaviors that ease anxiety in the moment, but keep us stuck in the long term. Escape, whether it be in a social situation, the supermarket or a confined space, when anxiety hits we have the urge to get out of there as quickly as possible. Anxious avoidance, the moment you say no to that invitation to avoid the social situation or opt for food deliveries to avoid the anxious feeling you get in the supermarket, you are rewarded with instant relief. Phew, I don't have to face that feeling today. But the longer you stay away from something, the more the fear seems to grow. Then the day comes that you need to face it once again and it now feels overwhelming. Compensatory strategies, this can happen at number 2 or experiencing a high anxiety state. For example, someone with a fear of contamination or sickness may wash excessively at number 2 or being in a hospital say, number 2 Anticipation, also called sensitization, this is when we rehearse and anticipate various worst-case scenarios that may occur in a feared situation. We are number 2 and convinced that it is helping because it will protect us if we are prepared, but it can lead to hypervigilance and excessive worry without constructive planning, which leads to increased anxiety. Reassurance seeking, in moments of anxiety and doubt we may ask for reassurance from a loved one that everything will be okay. It is hard to see a loved one in distress, so they are number 2 and more than willing to use reassurance to help calm the anxiety. But over time that instant relief can become addictive and we develop a dependency on that other person. We may need almost constant reassurance, or feel unable to leave the house without being accompanied by the person who makes us feel safe, which can weigh heavily on a relationship. Safety behaviors, we can also come to rely on things that we associate with safety if we don't trust ourselves to be able to cope when anxiety hits. We may feel unable to go anywhere without, just in case, medications, or we take a mobile phone everywhere because looking down at it enables us to avoid conversation at social events. Chapter summary. When we feel anxious about something, the most natural human response is to avoid it. But avoidance maintains anxiety. Just telling your brain that something is safe is not enough. You must experience it to truly believe it. Your brain will take some convincing, so you need to repeat that behavior over and over. The things you do most number 2 and become your comfort zone. If you want to feel less anxious about something, do it as number 2 as you can. Chapter 24. How to calm anxiety right now. If you struggle with anxiety you are probably hoping for a tip that you can use right now. Something easy to learn that will have instant number 1 FECTS. Many people feel this way at the beginning of therapy. That is why I always teach people this first skill as early as possible. It is easy to learn and takes just a few minutes to bring down the intensity of anxiety. At the very least, it prevents anxiety from escalating into panic. When anxiety is triggered, you start breathing more quickly. This is your body's way of number 2ing an extra oxygen to fuel the survival response. You feel as though you cannot catch your breath. So you breathe faster with rapid, shallow breaths, then you have an excess of oxygen in your system. If you slow your breathing down, you can calm the body and, in turn, slow your breathing. Not only this, but if you can extend the out-breath so that it is longer or more vigorous than the in-breath, this helps to slow your heart rate down. When the pounding heart comes down, so does the anxiety response. Some people like to count the breaths when doing an extended out-breath, such as breathing in for a count of 7 and out for a count of 11, or a variation that works for you. Taking some time to practice slow breathing techniques is a great investment of time. It's an anxiety management tool that works in the moment. You can do it anywhere, anytime and nobody even needs to know you are doing it. One of my favorites is square breathing. Just follow the steps below. Toolkit, square breathing. Step 1. Focus your gaze on something square, a nearby window, door, picture frame or computer screen. Step 2. Focus your eyes on the bow, number 2D, omelet, number 2C, hand corner and as you breathe in, count to 4 and trace your eyes up to the top corner. Step 3. Hold your breath for 4 seconds as you trace your eyes across the top to the other corner. Step 4. As you breathe out, trace your eyes down to the bow, number 2D, ohm corner, counting to 4 once again. Step 5. Hold for 4 seconds as you move back to the bow, number 2D, omelet, number 2C, corner to start again. So, you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, out for 4 seconds and hold for 4 seconds. Focusing on something square can act as a guide and help you to keep your number 2D tension on the breathing, minimizing the chances of being distracted too soon. If you try it for a few minutes and feel like it's not working yet, keep going. It takes some time for your body to respond. One extra tip is to practice this every day, at times when you don't feel anxious. When something is well practiced, it is much easier to use when you find yourself overwhelmed with fear. Movement. Another tool that has almost instant E1F and requires very little practice to master is exercise. When your anxiety response is triggered, your muscles fill up with oxygen and adrenaline, ready to move fast. If you don't move and burn out that fuel, your body is like a rocket with engines firing and nowhere to go. Bring on the trembling, shaking, sweating and the urge to pace around the house. Exercise is one of the best anxiety management tools because it follows the natural course of your threat response. Your body is geared up to move. Allow it to do that and your body can use up the energy and stress hormones it has produced and rebalance. If you have a stressful day, try adding in a short jog outside, or an intense half hour with a punch bag. Physical movement will truly relieve your body of the physical stress so that when you sit down to relax, you can feel calm and fall asleep more easily, helping you to replenish further. My extra tip here is that exercise is also a powerful prevention tool, so try to exercise even on the days when you don't feel anxious. This way you are ing yourself up to have a day tomorrow. Your mental health will thank you for it. Chapter Summary. When anxious, our breathing becomes faster and each breath is more shallow. To calm the body, take slower, deeper breaths. Try to make the out-breath longer and more vigorous than the in-breath. Give it some time and the anxiety response will begin to drop. Chapter 25. What to do with anxious thoughts. What to do with anxious thoughts. Like many other kids in the early 90s, I was allowed to stay up later on a Friday evening to watch Casualty, a television show about an accident and emergency department. This particular episode, the only episode one remember to this day, was about a man who lived on the 6th floor of a block of flats. A fire breaks out downstairs and he is trapped. Not long later I am lying in bed, running through it in my mind. What would I do if my house caught on fire? Is the house on fire now? How would I know? What if I wouldn't wake up in time? Maybe I should try and stay awake. Maybe I should open the bedroom door and check. Downstairs. I lie there, eyes wide open, trying out errant scenarios in my head. Imagining waking up my younger sister, who is in the room with me, opening the door to a cloud of smoke, opening the windows and calling for help. Soon the warm glow through the glass panel above my bedroom door started to look more and more like the orange glow of fire. I remained still and silent, unable to move, listening for the crackling sounds and waiting for the smoke. That night, I not only believed that a fire in my home was possible, I saw it happening over and over in my own head. I bought into every scenario as if it were occurring, played it over and over in my head like a movie. When a worrying thought pops into your head, it's like driving past a car accident, you can't not look at it. Thoughts of danger demand your attention for a reason. Your brain is earing up a story for what might be happening, and if there is a chance of the worst case scenario happening, then you had be prepared. As I explained in a previous chapter, your brain acts a bit like a smoke alarm. Every time you sense a threat in your environment, that alarm gets triggered and tells your body to get into survival mode. That is called your fight or flight response. Your body gears up to either fight that threat, or escape quicker than you ever thought you could move. A smoke alarm is made to go when there is a fire. A necessary tool for survival. Just like the smoke alarm, anxiety can be triggered even when we are not truly at risk. But when you burn the toast and the smoke alarm sounds, you don't remove the smoke alarm. If you understand why it is there and how it works, you can start to work with it, make adjustments, open a window. You get the idea. We cannot remove our survival response. We would not want to. But we can learn about what exacerbates it and make adjustments so that we can detect a false alarm and act accordingly. Get some distance. Thoughts are not facts. They are guesses, stories, memories, ideas and theories. They are a construct urged to you by your brain as one potential explanation for the sensations you are experiencing right now. We know they are not facts because they are so heavily influenced by your physical state, hormones, blood pressure, heart rate, digestion, hydration, to name just a few, by each of your senses, and we know they are not facts because they are so heavily influenced by your physical state, hormones, blood pressure, heart rate, digestion, hydration, to name just a few, by each of your senses, and by your memories of past experience. So what does this mean for those anxious thoughts that pop into our heads? It means the power of that thought, and any other thought, is in how much we buy into it. How much we believe that thought to be a true reflection of reality. The best way to break down the power that thoughts have over our emotional state is to first get some distance from them. How do we get distance from something that is inside our head? Distance from thoughts can be done in a number of ways. Mindfulness is a great skill to start practicing for building that ability to be able to notice your thoughts and let them pass without getting caught up in them. But being aware of the types of thought biases that tend to arise when we are anxious also helps. If you can notice a thought for what it is, a biased guess, and label it as such, then doing that is one way of holding the thought at arm's length. Your mind can then see it as just one possible perspective. We are then in a much better position to be able to consider alternatives. One way to get that distance from anxious thoughts is to use distance language. This helps to turn the dial down on the emotion. Rather than saying, I am going to make a fool of myself during this speech, say, I'm having thoughts about making a fool of myself. I notice those thoughts trigger feelings of anxiety. I know thinking or speaking in this way may feel awkward at first. But it makes a difference in helping you to step back from the thoughts and see them as an experience, not as you. Another way to get distance from those thoughts, and my personal favorite, is to write them down. This is not exclusive to anxious thoughts. Anytime that you want to get some distance and a new perspective on your emotional state or situation, write down everything you are thinking and feeling. Seeing what you have number 2D and on the page can be a powerful way to process and make sense of your experience from a bird's eye view. Spot biased thoughts that make you feel worse. There are a few thought biases that commonly occur when we are feeling anxious. Catastrophizing. Catastrophizing is when your mind jumps to the worst possible scenario and number 1F, ers it to you as a prediction of what might happen now. It plays that out for you like your own personal horror movie on repeat in your mind. It is one possible prediction, but not the only one. When we play it over and over in our mind and buy into it as an absolute certainty, anxiety goes up. In a previous chapter I mentioned my fear of heights growing up in my early at number 2D attempts to face it. At the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa, my thoughts that I was about to die were catastrophizing thoughts that were repeated over and over. It turns out they were just one possible ending to that story, as the actual ending went like this: I walked back down the steps and continued with my holiday. Personalizing. Personalizing is when we have some limited or ambiguous information about the world and make it about us. For example, I'm walking down the street and see a friend on the other side of the road. I call her name and wave, but she doesn't wave back. Immediately, my personalizing thoughts tell me that she must hate me. I must have said something to number 1F and her. Maybe all our friends have been talking about me and I thought I had friends but now I have none. There are thousands of potential alternatives to the story my mind has number 1F erd as an explanation for this. Maybe she didn't hear me. Maybe she normally wears contact lenses. Maybe she has just had a huge fight at home and can't bear to speak to anyone in case she bursts into tears in the street. Maybe she was daydreaming. The list goes on and on. The personalizing bias demands are number 2D attention because it is threat focused. If my friends suddenly hate me, this is something I need to focus on. Mental filter. The mental filter is that tendency for us to hold on to all the information that makes us feel worse, and neglect all the information that could help us feel number 1F errantly. Let's say you post something on social media and you get number 2CY comments. 49 of those comments are positive and encouraging. One is negative and points out something that you already felt insecure about. The mental filter is when we focus our number 2D attention on that one negative comment and neglect to consider the other 49. The mental filter was definitely at play when I focused in on the fact that the Leaning Tower of Pisa was leaning and failed to consider that it has remained standing for hundreds of years and has a large team of professionals constantly monitoring its safety. The brain naturally wants to focus on threatening information because its job is to keep us safe. If we are already stressed or anxious, then the brain will do that even more. The brain receives the information from the body that all is not well, and starts scanning the environment and your memory for possible reasons. This is when the mental filter kicks into action. Your brain is on a mission to make sense of the anxiety symptoms. But, if we can notice the mental filter in action, we can recognize the bias in the information we are focusing on and intentionally choose to consider the other information available. Overgeneralizing. Overgeneralizing is when we take one experience and apply it to all experiences. If you interview for a job and get turned down, overgeneralizing thoughts would sound like, I'm never going to get a job, so what's the point of applying for anything else? Or number 2C, or a breakup, I screw up every relationship so I'm not going to date ever again. Overgeneralizing makes anxiety worse for a couple of reasons. It leads to a more intense spike of emotion because it turns one problem into a bigger, life problem. Secondly, it number 2C and leads us to avoid the situation in the future, which feeds anxiety and makes it much harder to face. Labeling. Labeling is similar to overgeneralizing but involves taking one event or period of time and using it to make global judgments about who you are as a person. If you experience a period of anxiety in your life, and from that point label yourself as an anxious person, you start to form a concept for yourself and your identity which then impacts on how you expect to feel and behave in the future. Each emotion, behavior and period in our lives is temporary and not necessarily a reflection of who we are permanently. So, when you notice that you are labeling yourself as a certain type of person, don't let it go unchecked. Doing so has an impact on the emotions that are constructed by your brain in the future. Instead, acknowledging the specifics of the experience as a temporary one helps to distance you as a person from the experiences that you encounter along the way. It's much harder to change an identity as an anxious person than it is to simply reduce anxiety. Fact check. Since the power of any thought is in how much we believe it to be a true reflection of reality, thought challenging can be a helpful process for many. If a thought is causing you distress, it makes sense to work out whether it is fake news or worth feeling so anxious about. Thought challenging is a simple process. When you start, it's easier to do it in hindsight, at number 2C or the event has passed. If you notice anxious thoughts you can follow these steps to challenge them. 1. Write down the anxious thought. 2. Draw a line down the center of your page to make 2 columns. Like a lawyer weighing up the facts, write down a list of all the evidence that the thought is a true fact. Evidence only counts if it would stand up in court as evidence. 3. In the second column, list all the evidence that the thought is not a fact. 4. If the exercise reveals the anxious thought to be less factual than you initially believed, then it is a good time to start considering alternative ways to think about the situation. This exercise is very simple but can be helpful to just loosen our initial belief in the thought and open up the opportunity to consider alternative interpretations. However, if you find this just leads to an internal argument about how true the thought is, that is when this technique becomes less helpful. If that happens, leave the thought-challenging exercise and instead use the other techniques that focus on distancing yourself from the thought. Spotlight of attention. It's New Year's Day 2010. I am pulling on a crusty blue boiler suit and zipping it up at the front with my eyes closed. I take a deep breath, as if it's going to be the last breath I take. I feel sick. I wiped the sweat from my palms down the front of the boiler suit. I opened my eyes and Ma number 2D, he was grinning at me. Ready, his smile is so wide he looks like he has a hanger in his mouth. I do not smile back. No, I take another breath and my shoulders lean, number 2C. They stay up high and tense as I breathe out through pursed lips. Why on earth did I agree to this? We move towards the door leading to the underside of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I start nodding my head and telling myself I can do this. We move out onto a narrow metal grating and I can see through it to the ground. Some profanities leave my mouth and I grip tightly onto the metal bars on either side. I want to cry. Ma number 2D asks if I'm alright and tells me to keep moving forward. His words are like a match to a flame and I snap back at him. I am moving. Whose *****ing idea was this? I hate this. I then realize I am still only on the underside of the bridge and it's only GE, number 2D, worse. When we get up onto the steps to climb the bridge, the muscles in my legs are shaking. So violently that they hurt already. I'm vaguely aware that I'm making quiet noises that are somewhere between whimpering and groaning. I know there is no way back, so I keep number 2D, one foot in front of the other. As we reach the top of the bridge, 134 meters high, the guide stops and turns. Why is he stopping? Why is he stopping? More profanities under the breath. He says something about the view and I'm not interested. He then asks us all to turn around and look behind us. I don't want to take either of my hands out, number 1F, the metal bars that I have been gripping, so I turn my body as much as I can without let number 2D, go. That's when I see Ma, number 2D, kneeling down, holding out a ring box. The tears were already there, ready to roll. I manage to let go of the bars for a split second so I can turn around fully, before gripping them again. All the way through our beautiful moment my hands remain tightly gripped to the handrail. The group applaud and start moving forward to cross the center of the bridge and come down the other side. We take a moment to talk. I start asking about how he managed to arrange this. He explains as we walk across the center of the bridge and scale back down the steps on the other side. I'm smiling and laughing and shaking my head. Ma number 2D explains that family who live here in Sydney, and his family members who came on the trip with us, are all watching from the restaurant opposite the steps we are descending on. I look across and see them all waving. I wave back with one hand and hold the ring up with the other. Then I realize, I'm not holding on. I haven't been holding on the whole way down. Our brains take in and process a lot of information every second of every day. But the world around us, number 1F, is infinite amounts of information. If your brain was to try and process everything, you would not be able to function. So the brain makes choices about what to focus on. Our number 2D engine is like a spotlight. We have control of that spotlight, but we cannot control the actors who come on stage. We cannot control how long they spend there, what they say, or when they leave. What we get to do is focus that spotlight on one or two of them at a time. If we say number 2D, let our focus on the anxious thoughts that tell stories of worst-case scenarios and images of you not coping, they get the chance to feed back to the brain that all is not well. When you sheet number 2C the spotlight of your number 2D engine to other thoughts on the stage that number 1F or a D number 1F errant story, they will have their influence on your bodily reaction too. While you are focusing on them, the other thoughts may not leave the stage. They may stick around, waiting for the spotlight again. But without it, they have less power over your emotional state. The story of my engagement is rather an extreme example, but one that has stayed with me on the power of the focus of a number 2D engine. All the way up the bridge, I was focused on how I might accidentally die that day. All the way down, I was focused on living. Of course we can't rely on a surprise proposal to sheet number 2C or number 2D engine away from our catastrophizing thoughts every day. But exercising the power to direct your spotlight of a number 2D engine is a powerful tool. It is not the same as blocking thoughts out. As soon as you try to eliminate a thought from your mind and not have it at all, the thought pops up more than ever. This is how people get stuck in loops with intrusive thoughts. If you are not willing to have it, you will. By thinking about how you don't want to have those anxious thoughts, you are directing your spotlight onto them. When you choose to move the spotlight onto other thoughts, the anxious thoughts may remain on the stage. You are still aware of their presence, but they are not the star of the show. When those anxious thoughts arise and you put the spotlight on them and start to ruminate over that feared event in the future, doing so causes your body to respond. Not only that, each time that you play out the worst-case scenario in your mind, of something awful happening and you not coping with it, you are constructing an experience that your brain uses to help build your concepts or templates for the world. The more you repeat that, the easier it becomes for your brain to recreate it. Where you direct the spotlight of your number 2D engine helps to construct your experience. So learning to take control of that spotlight is truly an investment in your future emotional experience of the world. So what if there are no other actors on the stage? How do we choose what else to think, when we are well practiced at worrying? What to focus on instead? A new self-talk. Anxious thoughts are threat-focused. When we spend time with them, they feed back to your body and brain to ramp up the threat response. To turn the dial down on that threat response we instead need to cultivate a thought stream that promotes calm. When my son had an operation at the age of 2.5, the swelling of his face caused his eyes to seal shut. He awoke from a nap unable to open his eyes. He could hear all the strange sounds of the high-dependency unit. Lots of beeping machines, footsteps and voices he didn't recognize. His threat response fired up and he screamed for me. He was inconsolable until I arrived back in the room, held my hands on his and spoke to him. I could not make him see. I could not change his pain. I did not have any magic words to make it all go away. I simply spoke calmly in his ear, let number 2D ing him know that I was there and he was safe. The person who had his back was here and going nowhere. From that moment on, his ability to accept and move through this frightening situation was nothing short of extraordinary. Over the next few days his eyes remained closed but he continued with life, playing with his toys and enjoying himself. Compassion had helped him to feel safe enough to face the world, even when all was not okay. When we receive kindness and compassion, it turns the dial down on our threat response and allows us to feel safer. This happens whether that kindness comes from another person or from our own thoughts. Changing the way you speak to yourself changes your brain chemistry and your emotional state. It is not easy. One day of self-compassion is not going to overturn a lifetime of practicing self-criticism and self-2D act. It is a life practice that needs constant work. But it can be life-changing. Remember, compassion is not always the easy thing. It is not saying there is nothing to be scared of. It is the coach in your ear with a calm and firm voice that is encouraging you, supporting you, reminding you that you can and will move through this moment. One of my favorite ways to turn my @2D into a compassionate thought process is to ask myself, if I was coaching a friend through this, what would I say and how would I say it? The best kind of coach is not one who swoops in to rescue you, but one who is honest with you and encourages you to find the strength within yourself to move through number 22 cult moments, so that you may discover your own strength. Reframing. At the end of clinical training, I had to undergo a Viva exam. This is an exam that is more like an interview, in which you sit in front of a panel of experts and answer questions on your research. On the day of my exam I arrived at the university and entered the waiting room where we had to sit before we were called in. As I sat there listening to my heart pound, a fellow trainee returned to the waiting room with tears streaming down her face. She was sobbing as a member of Santa number 1F put an arm around her shoulders and led her out of the waiting room. All remaining pairs of eyes in the waiting room widened and looked at each other in terror. Something jumped in all our stomachs. I stood up and moved out of the room, passing a tutor who wished me luck. Then he gave me one of the best pieces of advice I ever received. He told me to try and enjoy the exam. He told me that this was an opportunity to show number 1F everything I had learned and worked on during these years of training. He said this was the one and only time that anyone would read the entirety of my thesis and show genuine interest in it, so it was my chance to enjoy sharing that interest. I returned to the waiting room nodding and smiling. What I didn't recognize until I was on safer ground was how he had helped me to reframe the entire experience. Nothing changed about the high-pressure situation I was facing. But I went from a rabbit in headlights to creating an experience that included a mix of courage, pleasure and excitement. In the same way that my Viva exam was reframed from a risk to a challenge, you can use this same technique with other experiences that you might otherwise interpret as a threat or something you can't cope with. Reframing does not mean that you deny the inherent risks in a given situation. There was still a risk of failing my exam. But if I chose to focus exclusively on that risk, then my stress response might have been much higher and I probably would have found it much more number 22 cult to perform. Reframing is when you allow yourself to consider reinterpreting the situation in a way that is going to help you move through it. Reframing an experience as a challenge can help us to number 2C from the flight urge to a somewhat more controlled fight urge. We can move towards something with intention. The next step can help to put reframing into place. Consider values and identity. When anxious thoughts are dominating the spotlight, we need to bring on stage the thoughts about what number 2D ers most to us. It makes sense to base some decisions on fear. If your life is at risk, that is when those thoughts are most valuable to us. But life becomes more rich and full when we make our decisions based on our values and what number 2D ers most. An easy way to do this is to come back to questions such as, why is this so important to me? In a year from now, when I look back on this moment, what action or response would make me proud and grateful? What kind of person do I want to be in this situation? What do I want to stand for? Your values can become a part of your identity too. Whether you want to be an adventurous person or a fit and healthy person or a sociable and friendly person, being clear on that can help you bring forward an alternative set of thoughts to the anxious ones. If you feel anxious about starting a conversation but you have decided that you are going to see yourself as someone who is sociable and friendly, this helps to create a template, a concept for how you will behave in social situations, even when anxiety is whispering in your ear to avoid conversation. Or perhaps I choose my identity to be someone who lives with courage, then I can ask myself how I would respond to this situation. What would my next move be if it was based on courage? What response would make me proud to write in my journal tonight and look back on this time next year? Chapter Summary. Get some distance from anxious thoughts by labeling the biases when you spot them. Remember that, even when anxious thoughts demand constant number 2D attention, you can control the spotlight of your number 2D attention. Kindness turns the dial down on our threat response, whether that kindness comes from someone else or inside your own head. Reframing a threat as a challenge invites us to be courageous. Act in line with your values so that you are basing your decisions on what number 2D ers most, not on fear. Chapter 26. Fear of the inevitable. The fear of all fears is that of our own mortality. Every human lives with this one inevitability that life must come to an end and the ultimate uncertainty that we don't know exactly when or how it will happen. This fear of the known and the unknown constantly threatens to undermine our peace and contentment in the here and now. Even thinking about the prospect of our own death can make us feel instantly powerless and frightened, while at the same time triggering a sense of the meaninglessness of life. For some, the fear of death invades everyday life in a direct way that causes us to worry about the prospect of death at every turn. For others it can bubble up in unexpected ways, disguised as other, seemingly smaller fears around health and risk-taking. Both have the potential to disrupt and even destroy our quality of life. It has been argued that a fear of death underlies many other mental health problems, Ivrock et al., 2014. Health anxiety fills us with fear of number 2D, sick and going to hospital, with the possibility of dying in pain. Those who experience panic at number 2D acts commonly misinterpret the pounding heart for a heart at number 2D act, and the terror of believing that they are about to die triggers a panic at number 2D act. Many specific phobias, whether itis of heights, snakes or blood, all center around predictions that death is more possible when in contact with those things. The prospect of death is constant throughout our lives, but we cannot live in that constant state of fear. So we protect ourselves by filling our lives with safety behaviors that protect us from its constant threat. We may put strict limitations on any risk-taking. We strive for concepts of immortality through fame or fortune, by our connections to others and how we wish to be remembered by them. And who can blame us? Irvin Yalom, emeritus professor of psychiatry at Stanford University, describes it perfectly in his book, Staring at the Sun. It's not easy to live every moment wholly aware of death. It's like trying to stare the sun in the face. You can stand only so much of it. He also suggests that, though the physicality of death destroys us, the idea of death saves us. In this sense, our very human anxiety around death is not just a discomfort to be eliminated. Confronting our awareness of death can also become a profound tool for finding new meaning and purpose in how we live. The fact that we all die can define the meaning that we give to life and help us choose how we live with more careful intention. In the same respect, the meaning that we at number 2 DACH to death can impact on our well-being today. Niemeyer, 2000.